Hello everybody. I thought I'd read you some poetry this time, some poems that I like, and I think they're quite amusing, and I hope that you find them funny too. And this first poem is written by Hilaire Belloc, who wrote in the Victorian days, and he wrote, as other people did, cautionary tales, which I think you might know. Cautionary tales are stories with children usually. They're cautionary tales for children to learn. Terrible things might happen to them if they're naughty. They're quite funny because the terrible things aren't really things that might happen. They're exaggerated to teach you a lesson. And this one is called Jim, one of my favourites. And Jim ran away from his nurse and was eaten by a lion. In those days, a nurse was the person who was your childminder or your nanny who looked after you. There was a boy whose name was Jim. His friends were very good to him. They gave him tea and cakes and jam and slices of delicious ham and chocolate with pink inside and little tricycles to ride, and read him stories through and through, and even took him to the zoo. But there it was the dreadful fate befell him, which I now relate. You know, or at least you ought to know, for I have often told you so, to leave their nurses in a crowd, children are never, never allowed. Now this was Jim's especial foible. He ran away when he was able, and on this inauspicious day he slipped his hand and ran away. He hadn't gone a yard when bang! With open jaws a lion sprang, and hungrily began to eat the boy, beginning at his feet. Now just imagine how it feels when first your toes and then your heels, and then by gradual degrees your shins and ankles, calves and knees are slowly eaten bit by bit. No wonder Jim detested it. No wonder that he shouted, "Hi!" The honest keeper heard his cry. Though very fat, he almost ran to help the little gentleman. "Ponto!" he ordered as he came, for Ponto was the lion's name. "Ponto!" he cried with angry frown. "Let go, sir! Down, sir! Put him down!" The lion made a sudden stop and let the dainty morsel drop, and slunk reluctant back to his cage, snarling with disappointed rage. And when he bent him over Jim, the honest keeper's eyes were dim. The lion, having reached his head, the miserable boy was dead. When nurse informed his parents, they were more concerned than I can say. His mother, as she dried her eyes, said, "Well, it gives me no surprise. He would not do as he was told." His father, who was self-controlled, bade all the children round attend to James's miserable end, and always keep a hold of nurse for fear of finding something worse. The next couple of poems I'm going to read are from this book called Sensational. It's an anthology of poetry chosen by Roger McGough, all linked to the senses. And I expect you know this book. I think most classrooms have got this collection in their classrooms. And the first poem is connected to sound. And it's by an American author called Jack Prelutsky. And it's called Louder Than a Clap of Thunder. Louder than a clap of thunder, louder than an eagle screams, louder than a dragon blunders or a dozen football teams. Louder than a four-alarmer or a rushing waterfall. Louder than a knight in armour jumping from a 10-foot wall. Louder than an earthquake rumbles. Louder than a tidal wave. Louder than an ogre grumbles as he stumbles through his cave. Louder than stampeding cattle. Louder than a cannon roars. Louder than a giant's rattle. That's how loud my father snores. I like that one, and I'm sure we all know somebody who snores a lot. Maybe your dad, maybe somebody else. This poem is by another American poet, Shel Silverstein, and it's called Ticklish Tom. Did you hear about Ticklish Tom? He got tickled by his mum. Wiggled and giggled and fell on the floor, laughed and rolled right out of the door. All the way to school, and then he got tickled by his friends. Laughed till he fell off his stool, laughed and rolled right out of school, down the stairs and finally stopped till he got tickled by a cop. And all the more he kept giggling, all the more the folks kept tickling. He shrieked and screamed and rolled around, laughed his way right out of town. Through the country, down the road, he got tickled by a toad. Past the mountains, across the plain, tickled by the falling rain, tickled by the soft brown grass, tickled by the clouds that passed. Giggling, rolling on his back, he rolled onto the railway track. Rumble, rumble, whistle, roar, Tom ain't ticklish any more. Oh dear. And last poem for today is also by Jack Prelutsky, the same poet, the American poet we heard from a couple of poems ago. And this is about smell, and it's about your nose. Be glad your nose is on your face. Be glad your nose is on your face, not pasted on some other place. For if it were not where it's not, you may not like your nose a lot. Imagine if your precious nose was sandwiched in between your toes. That clearly would not be a treat, for you'd be forced to smell your feet. Your nose would be a source of dread were it attached